on the Alitalia theme, I was once traveling with Alitalia. I had a layover in Rome, and there's some incredible. If you ever have a layover in Rome, there are incredible Jewish-related sites to see in Rome. Speak to me, I'll direct you. But I had to get from the airport to the train station, which is it's a part of the airport, the Fiumicino train station. So I turned to a local, and I say, "Excuse me, where can I find the Fiumicino train station?" And he says, "We don't have a Fiumicino train station." I'm like, no, you do. It's called Fiumicino. Just direct me right there. It's like, "I'm sorry, I don't have." So I had it on a piece of paper, and I said, "Look, you have it." He's like, "Oh, a Fiumicino." So they're not just having fun with the accent. If it's without the accent, it doesn't count. So just something to have in mind. So the topic is kosher. And I think that is an incredibly important topic because it is one of the most famous things about being Jewish. If you're sitting on the plane and someone's sitting next to you and they say, "Oh, by the way, what's the deal with kosher? What does that even mean? What's that about?" Like, we're the Jews. We're the ones who should be leading this conversation, but unfortunately, so many of us have a lot of confusion. We know we know different details. As a matter of fact, there's I think probably one of the most important works of theater and film, many Oscars, just a staple of everyone's education, Little Rascals, has the following scene.
Don't ask. Are these kosher?
Kosher dill pickles.
I've asked many people who've watched Little Rascals, and no one remembers it because it's so random. Your brain has nowhere to store it, but you do. Amazing. But
Can you play that one more time? That was so good. But you know, like TV shows too, black and white.
Don't ask. Are these kosher?
so, unfortunately, so many of us do the same exact thing when asked if something's kosher. I don't know. As a matter of fact, there was a guy who I used to learn with, and he worked in a company, and the company had a cafeteria, and he used to always go eat there, and eventually he decided he's going to take his Judaism to the next level, and he's going to try and keep kosher in the work cafeteria. So what he did was he only ate the salads and the vegetables. That was where he was holding in his kosher, and he avoided anything else. And the cook noticed that he had changed his preferences, and he was a little bit offended. Like, what? Do you not like my food any longer? It's like, what's the deal? And he said, "No, it's not about you. It's just I've started keeping kosher." And the chef laughed. He's like, "You have nothing to worry in my kitchen. I only use kosher salt." And he's right for being confused. In the initial slide, there were lots of different salts. One of them was kosher salt, and then the other one was just regular salt, but it had a kosher symbol on it. So it's like really, really confusing. So what is kosher truly about? This is probably the most important slide you will ever see in this room. Okay? If you remember one thing from this class, it should be this. I mean it. This is probably the most important class and the most important thing you'll learn here at Project 613. A priest, a rabbit, and a minister walk into a bar. The bartender asks the rabbit, "What do you have?" The rabbit says, "I don't know. I'm only here because of autocorrect." Okay? I think...
Oh, I get it.
Thank you. There's a reason why we get the joke. First of all, because autocorrect is extremely frustrating when we're writing Jewish things. But second of all, because obviously the joke is a bunch of clergy members walking to a bar. So Rabbit's not a clergy member, last I checked. But here's the deal. The joke is making a terrible mistake that I think every single one of us makes as well. And that is, since we're living in the United States, we have our own Jewish culture, but we're very much a part of the culture around us, which is not Jewish. And there's certain aspects of that seep in that we don't even notice. And the most important one is probably this one, that we think Judaism has clergy. You heard it here. Etch this in your brains. Judaism has no clergy. And with that, I am probably fired because I can't be a rabbi if there's no clergy. But here's the deal. Rabbis are not, okay, but in 2025, there is no clergy. Rabbis are not clergymen. What does a clergyman do for you? He does your religious stuff, right? You need to get married. You want to get married religiously. You have a clergyman. You have a priest marry you off.
Baptism.
Rabbis cannot marry you off. There's only one person who can marry you off, and that is you. The groom needs to intend on marrying her. She needs to be intending on getting married. She accepts the deal. They do it. They married each other. The rabbi is
The witness.
mostly a spectator, but what he's doing is he's directing traffic. He spent more years than we did studying all the different rules, and he wants to help you make sure you do it right. So he's going to direct you and make sure that when you try to get married, you will do a good job at it. That's all he's doing. He's directing traffic. We don't have clergy. And therefore, when it comes to kosher, you ask people what kosher is, the people who don't give you the kosher salt thing will tell you, oh, I know kosher, it's blessed by a rabbi. Answer is, there's no such thing as blessed by a rabbi. That's a clergy thing. We don't have clergy, okay? And this is extremely important because it's also super empowering. Every single one of us as Jews has the same mission, the same calling of owning our Judaism, living up to our Judaism, and paving a personal relationship with God in Judaism. No one's going to do it for us. There's no rabbi who's going to do the Jewish things for us. There's no such thing. It's on us. Okay, so it's extremely empowering, and it also clarifies a lot of different things that we get confused about when it comes to Judaism. So, if the rabbi is not blessing the food, because that's not a thing, what is the rabbi actually doing?
Overseeing everything.
Pretty similar to a wedding. The rabbi spent many, many years studying all the different laws of kosher, and he also spent a significant amount of time studying the different components and aspects of the food industry. If he's going to be a rabbi supervising factories, he needs to have the know-how of what's really going on in the factories and the chemistry of all the different. The food science is extremely complex. He needs to understand what he's looking at, understand what he's looking for. There's thousands of ingredients that go into a candy because all the different components of the flavor and all the different things. It's a fascinating and complex science, and he needs to understand where every single one of those ingredients comes from because they all just have these really cool Latin-sounding names that help you not realize that they're all poison, right? So he needs to understand the processes that these things go through to become what they are and be able to use his Jewish know-how to know whether that's a kosher issue or not a kosher issue. And then he signs off so that we don't need to walk into every factory, go in behind the counter of every single restaurant. He did the work for us, and he says, you have nothing to worry. Here's my stamp of approval telling you this is okay. But if anyone in this room wants to do the same thing, great. We'll take the time, we'll learn the rules, figure it out, walk in behind the counter and do the same thing because we don't have clergy. It's on us, every single Jewish person. That's why I hope you agree. This is probably the most important slide that'll make it in this room. So, let's take a look at what the rabbi is learning. Obviously, the rabbi does it in much more detail, but let's get an overview so we have a true understanding of what kosher is all about with no major gaps, so that next time we're on a flight or next time we're looking in the mirror, we truly have a grasp of what kosher is all about. So starting with animals, what makes a kosher animal? The Torah says, everything among the animals that has split hooves, I think outside of Chicago it's hooves, but here it's probably hoofs. So it has split hooves, which are completely separated into double hooves, and that brings up its cud. That one you may eat. So there are two kosher signs that define an animal as kosher. First of all, it has to have split hooves, right here in the picture, and it has to chew its cud, which means that after it eats something, it stores it in a certain part of its intestines. Instead of fully processing it, it stores it there for a little bit, and then it ruminates on it. It brings it back up, and it chews it again before it's done digesting the food. So those are the two symbols. Yes, Ohad, you wanted to ask something? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Okay, so those are the two basic symbols of what make an animal kosher. If you'll think about it, and we'll go a little more into different ideas behind kosher, but you can start getting a sense of what might be different between these animals and other animals. First of all, you will only find prey in this list. There are no predators that fit this bill. So you start getting a sense, okay, there's different types of animals, different types of compositions of the nature of these different animals, But let's just leave that aside for now. Next, we have when it comes to birds. So I'm going for
It's a great movie.
yes, the real staples of our education. So when it comes to birds, these shall you abominate from among the birds. They may not be eaten. And rather than doing what we did with the animals, where we have a list of signs of what defines a kosher animal, here the Torah is taking the opposite approach and says, I'm going to give you a list of categories that are not kosher, and those that don't fall in any of those categories, you can eat. Okay? And I don't have the whole list here, but the eagle, the osprey, the azania, and the reason why I didn't bring the whole, this is not connected to Rabbi's Alitalia flight. It's not no relation to lasagna. But the reason why I didn't bring the whole list is because practically speaking in 2025, the list is not super helpful because the list is categories, and you have to know whether each bird falls into what category and have a clear definition what the category is. And since it's complicated to know which bird falls into what we do in practice is we eat birds that we have a tradition from our grandparents, from their grandparents, that these are kosher birds and do not fall into any of those categories in any way. So that is when it comes to kosher birds. Again, none of the kosher birds are birds of prey. They are.
Vultures.
What was that?
So no vultures.
No, I'm so sorry. No vulture chicken patties. No vulture patties. But the obviously the classics, chicken, duck, all these things are kosher. They do not fall pigeon. There's a whole bunch of kosher foods that I don't necessarily recommend, but they're pretty classic, mostly domesticated forms of fowl. That's not a sports concept. Another aspect that has to do with whether an animal is kosher is not just whether it happens to have been born kosher, but you also want to make sure it is still kosher. And that comes to this next category, which is do not eat from a carcass or from a fatally maimed animal to be contaminated through it. I am Hashem. Okay? You have a great example of what that might look like in the background of this slide. But an animal, for it to be kosher, needs to be healthy to a certain extent. So there are certain ailments or diseases or I guess maims that would consider an animal or even a chicken to be non-kosher. And part of what a rabbi does when he's supervising kosher meat is he's not just making sure the meat is coming from a kosher source, but then after the cow or the chicken was slaughtered, he will then give it a certain inspection to make sure, I guess, post-mortem, if you will, to make sure that it didn't have any of those lists of ailments that would consider it to be non-kosher. So, classic example is a punctured lung. That would make it non-kosher. These things are very relevant today more than ever because the conditions that some of these cows are raised in are pretty harsh, and therefore that can lead to certain lung diseases and certain issues. So that's a big deal in checking. People wonder why kosher meat is more expensive than regular meat. This is one of the main reasons, because if they're paying a rabbi to properly slaughter every single one of these cows, but only one in every so many is actually kosher, that's a lot of labor that's not making it to the meat in the kosher supermarket, and that raises the price a little bit. That's that aspect, and it's true both in cattle and in birds. Yeah.
So is this more about lot though, or no?
More about what? Sorry.
Like lot kosher versus is that like?
Great question. So in the nuances of what you're going to consider good and what you're gonna pass and what you're going to pass on, that's where these different nuances of different supervision levels come in. Like lot means like no issues, and non-glot means yeah, there were some issues, but we still think it's okay. So
Punctured lung, for example, like I thought it would still be kosher, but it wouldn't be glot kosher, like post-mortem.
yeah, I think if there's a punctured lung, it would not be kosher, but there are other things that are more in between.
It's like a tire you can't pass.
International hot dogs, they're not glad kosher.
Yeah.
We should really get Rabbi Fishbane's out of the CRC so he came, whatever, he explained that they take these cow lungs and they blow them up, okay? And they stick them underwater. And if there are bubbles that go up, that means that there's a hole in it. And
Yeah.
that's tricky.
Don't try this at home,
Yeah,
but.
don't try this at home. If I see anyone taking home cow lungs, okay, we got bigger issues, okay? But just to show how precise it is, even the naked eye can't determine it. Like you look at your tire, it's like, I don't know, is there a hole? No, you don't know, right? So, pretty cool stuff.
Rabbi Marcus, what about a turkey?
That is a great question, more related to our previous slide. In terms of, just to explain the question, I mentioned that since there are so many different categories, there's a list of 7 categories of bird that are not kosher, and you always want to make sure that the bird that you're eating doesn't fall under any of those categories. And the way to do it, since some of the names on the list, we're not 100% sure what exactly is in that category or not. And the way you can know that we're not sure is go on, let's say, Sefaria, which is an online Torah that has translations and has a list of translations to pick from. And go into the verse that has the list over here, the full list, and go from translation to translation. You'll see that not everyone's translating them exactly identically, because there are different theories about certain. Some of them are clear. We know exactly what the eagle family is and what falls under that category and doesn't. And some of them we're less sure about, and therefore you don't want to take any risks if you're eating a bird that you're not sure about. So what you're asking is, we came to North America and came into contact with these birds that we had not really had hanging around so much in the shtetl in Europe, the turkey. And if you're going based on a tradition of the birds that you've been eating, how do you know that this turkey is okay? And believe it or not, it's very, very small minority, but there are rabbis who are not comfortable with the turkey. Most rabbis are, and the reason is because we do have clarity about the chicken family, and we have reasons to consider the turkey halachically within the chicken family. The Talmud brings certain signs, even though the Torah does not list signs for a kosher bird. The Talmud does bring some that the turkey nails. There's also crossbreeding with kosher bird that we have a tradition of that happens with the turkey. So we have various very strong reasons to believe that the turkey is kosher. And as a matter of fact, even the rabbis who don't eat turkey, which is again very, very rare, it's not that they think it's not kosher, it's that they want to stick to the tradition. Since there's no explicit tradition, that's their personal thing, they want to refrain from it. But it's not like they consider it not kosher that if you in your house cooked turkey, then he's like, oh, I'm not going to use your pots because it's not kosher. It's really more of like, I want to stick to the specific wording of the tradition that I have. What was that?
It's treated more like a minhag than a halacha.
Meaning the way they...
The minhag is to not eat it versus the halacha is to not eat it.
Right. Usually those are very separate things. In this case, it's a little more enmeshed, but that's the basic idea. Okay, so that's in terms of making sure the animal is healthy and has the potential to. You don't want to be slaughtering an animal that would have dropped dead a day later anyways. That's definitely a no-no. You want to make sure that the ailments that the animal may have had are not the type that we're going to kill it in the next few months. So that's where that list comes from. Yes?
So while that's fairly obvious with a punctured lung or a messed up rib cage, I mean, how did they weed out, I don't know, brain glands and mad cow disease or whatever it was back 2000 years ago?
Right. The specific diagnosis is not what we're worried about. It's the symptoms of the diagnosis. Meaning, okay, there's some sort of disease. How does that disease affect the animal? Is it affecting its lungs? Is it affecting its brain? Is it affecting right? And then the symptoms of the disease will probably hit if it's like the type of disease that's on its way to kill the animal. It'll probably hit one of the things mentioned in the Talmud that render an animal unkosher. Just if we're on the topic of sick animals and stuff like that, I think this is an important thing to bring up, is that many people like to think of kosher as some sort of system that we came up with to help us with health issues, to prevent us from consuming anything unhealthy. That is a misunderstanding of kosher. It happens to be that in certain areas of kosher, that's a beautiful side benefit that God gave us with the rules. He's like, okay, I also set the world up in a way that following these rules is going to help you out in certain areas, but that is not the point of kosher. And you can lead a non-kosher, very, very healthy lifestyle. And let me tell you, you can also do the other way around. I've seen it. So, just look for lots and lots of different brown dishes at a Shabbat table. Focus on them, and just eat that all day, every day, and you'll understand what I'm referring to. No, cholent at Project 13 is a totally different thing. But still, I don't know if I would recommend making that your staple 3 times a day, every single day. Keep it for Shabbos, and you'll do great. Okay, so that is as far as what's called a treifa. This, by the way, this word treifa is where the word treif, the Yiddish word treif, comes from. It's this idea of this non-kosher, it's treif. It's the word for fatally maimed. So next time you ask someone if something's treif, you're basically asking them, is this fatally maimed? But we use it as an umbrella. It's like people say, are you kosher? So say, well, are you treif? That's a great response. But we use it as like an umbrella term for anything that doesn't fall under the various rules of kosher, but the literal meaning is this animal that has an ailment that will not allow it to survive for the next few months. Next, we have a really, really cool mitzvah in the Torah. And the reason why it's cool is because it brings us back to understanding how the Torah actually works. Okay, there's a lot of confusion about that. We have the 10 Commandments, and then we have the 5 books of the Torah, and then we have, if you speak to a rabbi, some of the things the rabbi will tell you, if you take the time and look through the books of the Torah, you will not actually find it in the book. And you go back to the rabbi and you say, Rabbi, I think you were misleading me. I went through the entire 5 books of the Torah, and that instruction that you told me about the don't do X on Shabbat or whatever it is, it's not there in the book. And that's because when we received the Torah, we also received something called the oral Torah. And as a matter of fact, most of the instructions on how to live a Jewish life are in the oral Torah, not in the written Torah. A point in our history where this really came to the forefront is with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal. There were many Jews who wanted to remain Jewish, but they had a hard time leaving, or if it was in Portugal, sometimes they didn't even have a choice, and therefore they had to kind of raise their children as Jews in secret. And eventually, the only Jewish knowledge that they had, and the only access they had to Jewish writing, was in their Bibles, whatever the equivalent of the King James Bible was back in the day. They would just say, they would tell their children, like secretly, like, by the way, focus on the first part. The second part's just like, it's like the later Star Wars. Like, forget it. It's like not right. And therefore, their entire concept of what it meant to be Jewish came from the Spanish translation of the 5 books of the Torah that they had in their Bibles. And eventually, when they were able to move to other countries and meet Jews who were living an observant Jewish lifestyle, there was this incredible clash of like what they pictured a Jew looks like and what they pictured Jewish life should look like was totally different than what they saw. And the reason is because traditionally we live our lives based on the instructions in the oral Torah. Those instructions are anchored in basic ideas in the written Torah, but most of the instructions are in the oral one. And one of the ways that we see that relationship is right here in this verse, where the Torah tells us that when you want to eat a kosher animal, it's not enough for the animal itself to have been born kosher and to be healthy. Also, you need to slaughter it. You shall slaughter from your herd and from your flock that God has given to you in a very specific way. You can't just shoot it. You can't inject it. You have to slaughter it in the manner that I have commanded you, meaning I gave you the instructions. You know I gave you the instructions. Please refer to those instructions every time you want to make yourself a steak. This is in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Torah. And you're like, oh, shoot, I was spacing out when we read the instructions. Let me flip back to the beginning. And you start again, and the instructions are in the book. Because most of our instructions are actually in the oral Torah, and this is a great example of that. So that is, in order for the animal to be kosher, just to recap, it needs to have been born kosher, it needs to still be kosher through its health, and it then needs to be slaughtered in a very specific way by a Jewish shochet. That's what we call shechita. That's the ritual slaughtering. It's the knife, which you can just barely see in the background, needs to have no blemish on it, no nicks, because if you have a really, really sharp knife and you cut something like butter, what you're doing is you're basically separating the molecules. When you have a knife that's serrated or has a nick, you are tearing, because the skin or whatever it is you're cutting gets kind of caught in that nick. So I'm sorry if this is graphic, but if the skin gets caught, that would render the shechita not kosher, probably connected to the fact that is more, the animal is more able to feel that, it's more painful. You want it to be this smooth, quick thing, and a shochet will constantly check his knife to make sure it doesn't get any blemishes, because it's not enough that I started this project 2 cows ago with a kosher knife, I want to make sure that every single cow is going to be kosher and going to be done properly. So that is as far as shechita is concerned. Another aspect of kosher, because yes, we are not done yet, is milk and meat. This one's a little fuzzy in the background, but you can just kind of see it. And it's not just milk and meat. Okay, fine, but let's hold it for a second. It says, do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. Okay? That is a very fascinating verse. Do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. What it kind of sounds like is that as long as the meat that you're using and the milk that you're using, you want to have a cheeseburger, just make sure that the cheese is from one cow and the burger is from another. Or if you're at a McDonald's, it's probably from no cow, so then you don't have to worry about that at all, right? As long as you make sure that that's not happening, you should be fine. But this brings us back again to that idea that we have the written Torah that has basic ideas often written in a way that you can't really fully understand what it's referring to. But if you were in Spain, 3rd generation after the expulsion, that's exactly what you would do. Once you were able to move to Amsterdam, where you came into contact with other Jews, you'd be really confused why everyone was avoiding all cheeseburgers. So the instruction in the oral Torah is you're not supposed to mix any meat and milk. You're not supposed to cook it. You're not supposed to eat it. You're not supposed to enjoy it. Meaning you shouldn't open up a cheeseburger stand in your local stadium saying, I'm not eating it, this is my business. You're not supposed to do any of those.
Any meat?
What was that?
Any meat?
This is referring specifically to a cheeseburger of any meat and any milk.
Yeah.
But
The oral.
right, but the relationship between the oral and the written is very interesting. Meaning, you have kind of a basic idea that's not so easy to understand in the written book. You have the full instructions in the oral Torah, but they work together. Meaning, the information in the oral Torah is always going to be hinted to in the written Torah, and the reason why the written Torah wrote what it wrote in the way that it did is always going to have a message. A classic example of this is if there's a fight, one guy knocks out the other guy's eye. Anyone know what the Torah says? An eye for an eye. It's a famous line in general culture, an eye for an eye, right? You read that, and you're like, oh my gosh, court needs to take its own little dagger and make the two guys look identical, right? Kind of go away with 3D vision. But the oral Torah says, no, God forbid, that's never a thing. Go to any Jewish court, even, back in the desert before we even entered the land of Israel the first time, an eye for an eye always meant money. So that information of the fact that it's referring to money is going to be hinted in an eye for an eye in that verse. And then there's also going to be a reason why the Torah chose to say an eye for an eye instead of just saying straight out money for an eye. Just, if we already brought that example, the reason there why the Torah doesn't say money for an eye is because the Torah is trying to teach you an important lesson. The fact that you can pay your way out of the situation that you're in does not rectify what you did. There's no amount of money that's going to return this person's eye back. And you have to understand that, and you have to figure out how to make actual amends. In court, we're going to put some sort of number on that, but don't think you're done just because you can't afford it. What really, theoretically, you owe this person is an eye for an eye. So that's that idea. So right here, if the Torah is referring to any meat and milk together, why does it say, do not cook a goat in its mother's milk? Clearly there's something it's trying to convey with that vivid image. It's a very vivid image of a goat in its mother's milk. Just the fact that there's cooking and there's eating and there's enjoying, that's hinted by the fact that it's repeated 3 times in the Torah, same exact words. Why that teaches us those 3 things is a separate conversation, very fascinating. But the image of cooking a goat in its mother's milk is kind of speaking to us, right? You kind of feel like there's just something very wrong about that picture, and you can't necessarily nail it. Like you're taking the baby goat, and you're taking the milk that was supposed to nourish it and supposed to be the source of its life, but you're killing the goat, and you're mixing it with that life, and you're serving that. You can definitely hear the image that the Torah is trying to conjure. And Rabbi Hirsch I'll I'll share what he says. I'll share what he says right now, but it's really connected to the entire topic of kosher. And that is that whenever you're dealing with food, food's an incredibly powerful thing. And in Judaism, we celebrate food and we constantly bring it in to, they tried to kill us, let's celebrate, let's eat, right? That's what we always say because it's a very Jewish thing. We have a holy day called Shabbos. Wow, let's make an incredible project, 16 children. We have a day called Passover. Wow, we're going to make matzah and matzah balls and all these different, every single holiday comes with food. It comes with sitting down and celebrating. Instead of saying, wow, if this is a time to connect to God, let's just spend our time on a mountaintop focusing on spirituality. Clearly, we want to engage in food. At the same time, food has a certain risk with it. In life, we want to lead spiritual lives. We also have bodies that we want to take care of. And there's a tug of war between our souls and our bodies on what type of lives we're going to lead. Our bodies are basically animals. Our souls are basically purely spiritual. And we can either lead very spiritual lives, body and soul, or we can lead very physical lives, just focusing on our body and kind of living as sophisticated animals. Many people, if you ask them what a person is, they'll tell you a sophisticated animal, and that is a very accurate description of how they themselves are leading their lives. We don't want to be that, right? And when you're sitting down to eat, there is probably nothing more potentially animalistic than that. You're saying, let me put some sort of flat surface in front of me that can hold anything that looks good, smells good, and tastes good, and let me take that and stick it into my mouth, chew it, and then swallow it, right? That's basically what you're doing. At the same time, it is an incredible opportunity for connecting to spirituality, of feeling good about yourself, feeling good, connecting you with the people around you. You sit down for a meal with friends and family, and by the end of the meal, you're super tight, you're super close because you had this incredible experience together. The fact that God created so many different colors, flavors, textures is an incredible opportunity for gratefulness as you're eating it. God could have totally created a world of Soylent. If you don't know what it is, that's even better, right? Just plain grub that is your sustenance. But that's not what God created. God created this incredible world of so many different flavors and textures. And then when we thought he was done, he introduced us to sushi, right? So it's an incredible opportunity for spirituality as long as the food doesn't become an end in itself. And if you want the quintessential image of an end, of something that was meant to be moving towards something, and you turn it into something that is caught in its own cycle, it's taking that baby and taking its meat and mixing it with the milk that was supposed to be its source of life, and you're basically taking the life and the death and you're putting it together in an endless cycle. You're saying this is a beginning and this is an end. This is where it starts, this is where it ends, this is what it's all about. And the image of the goat in its mother's milk is meant to convey that image for us, but it's true not just about milk and meat, it's true about all kosher. All kosher is taking the food that we eat and designing it to be as conducive as possible for our spirituality and not as an end in itself to help us become more caught up in just being bodies without souls. We want there to be an incredible, beautiful fusion. Just on the topic of Rabbi Garfinkel losing his job, what the role of rabbis actually is, rabbis in your life, not the rabbis who are in the factories, but rabbis in your life, the rabbis are meant to be your Sherpa, which means they have scaled, or hopefully at least some part of the Everest of spirituality, and their job is to show you how to do your own scaling, meaning you're doing the scaling yourself, but since they've gone their route, they're there to help and guide you, and you should definitely take advantage of them and don't give him a moment of rest. Definitely not fired. Yeah?
I was taught that back in the day chicken was okay, but that's an oral thing. That says don't have chicken with dairy.
That is a great point. When the verse says, this is quite the crowd here. When the verse says, do not cook a goat in its mother's milk, it's referring to all animals, not just goats, but it is referring to animals, not to chickens. Chickens is the next step in terms of when God gave us the Torah, he gave us instructions on different areas that he wants us to do our part in adding what's called safeguards. So God could have said, let's say, just to bring an example, if God doesn't want us to do business on Shabbat, and he knows that he programmed us as Jews to have a hard time seeing a 90% clearance and not buy it, so he should have said, therefore, on Shabbat, I don't want you to carry your wallets. But he doesn't do that. He says, I'm going to say don't do business, and I want the Jewish people, through its rabbinic representatives, to figure out where they want to put the safeguard and say, oh, if this is a cliff and this is super important, I want to put a fence slightly behind it because I'm not hanging around near a cliff, right? But he wants us to decide that it's a cliff. That's how, in any relationship, the way you show you care is by saying, oh my, if you're in a relationship and your significant other tells you that she's allergic to peanuts, please don't have peanuts next to me. It's your role to say, oh my gosh, if you're allergic to peanuts, I'm not having peanuts on any day that I might see you, because I'm not taking a risk because I care, right? That's much more meaningful than her saying, oh, you're never having peanuts when you're in the same city. You want it to be a relationship where you're finding what you're bringing to the table, and chicken is a great example of that. Okay, so as far as fish are concerned, we're still with our theme of important classics. So
Fish are friend, not food.
what was that?
Fish are friend, not food.
Exactly. It says you may eat any creature that lives in the water, whether in seas or rivers, as long as it has fins and scales. So we're back to giving defining signs for what's considered kosher, and the signs the Torah gives are fins and scales.
Like tuna.
Like tuna, great example. Not like sharks. But here's a really cool thing that the rabbis do, okay? We're going back to this whole concept of the oral Torah. The rabbis say, let me let you in on a secret that we have from the oral Torah. Even though the Torah tells us to avoid anything that doesn't have fins and scales, if you're in a fish market somewhere and you see a piece of fish that has scales on it, but they cut it so you can no longer see if it had fins, say the rabbis, buy it and enjoy it. Which is shocking. Torah said you need to make sure it has fins as well. The rabbis say, let me explain to you why we're saying this. It's not that they're not both important. It's that there is no fish in the world, anywhere in the world, that has scales and no fins.
I was just going to Google that.
And do you know how the rabbis
I'm like, that doesn't make any sense.
do you know how the rabbis knew that? Because the rabbis were marine biologists who went,
Where's Marcy?
they crossed every bit of water there was around the world, including Australia, which was really cool on their part. And they came back and they said, no, obviously not, right? Think about it. They're at a time when probably less than 1% of the world's waters had been explored, okay? They knew what was in the river right near them in Mesopotamia. They knew what was within the first several hundred meters of the shore in the Mediterranean. Not much more. And they said, take it from us. There is no such thing as a fish that has proper scales but no fins. And therefore, if you see the scale, it has to be proper scales, not like the things that, like, if you rub it in the wrong direction, it's prickly. It has to be proper scales. If you see that, you can eat it, no problem. It's not going to have fins. I was curious. There was actually an interesting event that happened several hundred years ago where they found something called the Stincus marinus, which seemed to have scales and no fins. And they took it to the rabbis of the time. One of them was the Ritva, who was a great sage of the generation. They brought it to him and they said, look, the rabbi said there's no such thing, but here it is. And you know what he said?
The dinosaur.
He said, great question. But the rabbis say there's no such thing. And obviously he looked kind of silly because science had discovered what he said could not be. And he's like, yeah, but the rabbis say. Eventually they discovered that the Stincus marinus, usually now referred to as a Stincus stincus, this is not about not showering. This is a type of fish, or not fish. It wasn't actually a fish. It's mostly a land animal. They had just been discovering it in the water, but it's not a fish. It's like a type of lizard, I think. So you can look that up. But I checked to see if ChatGPT thinks this is still true. I said, is there any fish that has scales and no fins? And it said no. But then it's like, oh, by the way, in a kosher context, if you're asking this in relation to kosher fish, the rule is a kosher fish must have both fins and scales. So even if a fish had scales and no visible fins, it wouldn't be considered kosher. But again, no such fish actually exists. If it has kosher type removable scales, it will have fins. Would you like a short list of kosher fish examples too? Or fine fish, kosher fish restaurants you can eat at? No, thank you, I'm good. But I wasn't asking it about a kosher context, but it's like, oh, by the way, you need both. But actually, I haven't found any that have one and not the other. So as long as it has scales, no such fish actually exists. So now you know the secret. It's not that the rabbis were marine biologists. They just were the first ones to program ChatGPT. Exactly. So that is as far as fish are concerned. Yes, Tyler.
So I don't know if this is early mentioned, I heard about 20 years ago, but aren't there certain species like swordfish or marlin that kind of lose their scales as they mature?
So that's a great question beyond the scope of this.
Piercing question, Tyler.
That's a great. It's a great question beyond the scope of this discussion, and also happens to be also beyond the scope of my expertise. So I am not going. Do your own Wikipedia research on that one.
We like questions. Are great
Yeah.
stories or questions?
Great questions, and I have no problem saying I don't know the answer. I know it's a controversy, and it's very exciting. One aspect of kosher that is much less famous than all the others, but is equally important,
Bugs.
is
Can I preface this, Rabbi? If anyone does not want their life ruined in terms of eating a non-kosher, this is really. Do you want to do this to them?
Yeah, it's fine.
I do, of course I do.
It's 2025.
So another thing that's not kosher is every flying insect that uses 4 legs for walking, it is an abomination to you. We're not supposed to be eating bugs. This has become more and more of an issue just in general because food science is looking for really cool proteins like dried beetles and different stuff and trying to figure out where it can be thrown into different foods. So that's a no for us. But where it gets really problematic is in leafy vegetables.
That's why the mashgiachs are checking lettuce at every restaurant they work at.
Broccoli, cauliflower, lettuce.
This
Cabbage.
The blood is for this is great. I love it.
That's
Let's
why
just
some
say,
kosher stand
if
for
you
lettuce.
buy lettuce and you want the lettuce to be kosher, rinse it, soak it,
100 times.
clean it. But my brother was actually a what's called a mashgiach, a rabbinic supervisor in a restaurant, and he called me up one day and he said, "You know how everyone's really excited about kale being a super protein vegetable?" He's like, "I've been discovering why." And he would send me pictures every day. Here's what I found today. Around the next day. Yes, it's a super vegetable. There's lots of protein. So gotta make sure. I'm not gonna send you all the pictures, not to totally ruin your day, but wash off. What was that? Yeah, exactly. So wash your vegetables. Do yourself a favor. Avoid proteins that are not so good for our soul.
Can I say one technique? Because this is where when people come, they ask us, Rabbi, when they want to take the next step in like keeping kosher and say, Rabbi, I'm only eating salads out, and I'm like, oh, and the rabbi's like, how many thrips are you eating per square thing of? It's just romaine lettuce and so 2 solutions. One is well, it's not even washing. It's you actually buy kosher lettuce. It's nothing to do with it. Animals. It's just literally it's been checked. And so there was a Jewish magazine. It's sort of like the Orthodox weekly magazine called Mishpacha Magazine, and they had this cartoon in it recently, and they said funny things about Orthodox Jews. Okay, and then all these different scenes, and the first one was where lettuce is a luxury item. You're paying this because you're paying someone to check it, whatever. So there is good news. Either go to the grocery store and buy and certified, or iceberg lettuce, which is the least tasty, but it is legit. And iceberg lettuce does not have any of the nooks and crannies, and therefore can be eaten without all of that stuff.
I'm gonna be slightly more lenient than Rabbi here. I'll say, and not much. Don't get too excited. But if you take a bowl, you fill it with lettuce. Okay, take the head of lettuce, tear off the leaves, put in the bowl. Here's the part that's not so fun. Fill it with water, but also put some soap and mix it so that the lettuce gets a little soapy. No, I'm specifically saying soap. The reason why I'm saying that is because you're not going to want to eat soapy lettuce. So you're going to wash it and wash it well. If you do that, I'm good with that.
No. I was talking about in a restaurant situation.
Oh, in a restaurant
People
situation.
want to go out and they want to keep kosher and they want to have a salad. You can order iceberg lettuce.
Yeah. But just also like a little bit of soap makes the bugs that are more clingy kind of slip off if you wash it and you give it a little rub. So if you're not hosting 100 people, it's really not a big deal. It's a 6-minute project, and you'll have only issue is you'll have less protein in your diet. Make sure you're getting your protein elsewhere, not from ugly, creepy-crawly things that if you saw under a magnifying glass, you would run the other way. Yes?
So, what, like, isn't there some sort of brown grasshopper?
Great. There is
Ethiopian
one
Jews
form
eat
of grasshopper that is actually kosher. Most Jews do not have a tradition on what form of grasshopper that is, and therefore we refrain from eating grasshopper. There are Yemenite Jews who say they do have a tradition, and I have a ton of respect for that. If I was in any of my Yemenite friends' houses and they served something with little legs, I would.
As long as they don't live in Yemen anymore, they're not I'm not sure I want to visit them in Yemen.
Right, I'm not visiting them in Yemen. All my Yemenite friends are no longer in Yemen and not affiliated with any terror groups.
How did you get there? By boat.
The Torah specifically says this type of grasshopper is kosher, which is very interesting. There's something about that specific one that's different than all the other ones, even though they seem pretty similar. Either way, I do not know which specific grasshopper that is, and I have not been losing any sleep over it. Okay. No offense, again, to my Yemenite friends. So one more thing, actually two more things. We've almost gone through every single aspect of what makes something kosher. There's just two more steps. One is specific fats called chelev. So if you're slaughtering your own cow in your backyard, please look it up, which fats you should not be consuming. And also no blood. And that's actually where kosher salt comes from. We are not allowed, ironically, the only people that have been accused of drinking blood are the people who will not have any drop of blood, which is why after we have a piece of meat, we cover it in salt to have the salt draw out any of the blood. And next time someone asks you about kosher salt, that is what kosher salt is. It is salt for making something kosher. It's not about the salt itself being kosher. Technically, all salt is kosher. So that is the two last steps. You don't want to have this chelev fat, and you want to make sure you're salting the meat. That we'll do questions after. I just want to wrap up. So that is basically what kosher is. After the entire list of what defines kosher, it says, "For I, Hashem, am the one who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy." And this really summarizes what kosher is all about. For I am Hashem who brought you up. What does this have to do with Egypt? Why is God bringing Egypt into the story? Right, but all the mitzvahs you can say, oh, therefore I am the one. Right, but specifically when it comes to kosher, and that's because brought you up in Hebrew, hama'aletchem, can be translated as brought you up, but really what it's saying is I elevated you, thank you. I'm the one who elevated you, meaning the purpose of the laws of kosher is because we have an elevated national calling. We have an elevated national mission, and that's why it's not that things that aren't kosher are dangerous. God cares about non-Jews also. He wouldn't say, okay, you guys, I'll eat the stuff that's going to kill you, and I only care about these guys. I'll only tell them what they should be saying. That's not what it's about. It's about the fact that we have an elevated national calling. We have a specific national mission, and for that mission, we need to be as spiritually tuned as possible. And just like any mission or any life focus, if you really have a life focus and you want to get perfect at it, it comes with a diet. You want to be a champion? Got to make sure you're eating food of champions, right? And what this image is trying to convey is that our cells constantly replace themselves, right? After a certain amount of years, no part of you is the person who you looked at the mirror that many years ago, or whatever it is, a decade ago, right? So where do you come from? What constitutes the you that you are now? It's really coming from the energy of all the different foods that you ate, which is why people say you are what you eat. It's literally true. And it's literally true physically. It's also true spiritually. You are what you eat. And that's why Hashem said, since you guys have a national calling for which you need to be as spiritually tuned in as possible, I am going to give you the diet that is perfect for what you are supposed to be doing. And it's a really incredible thing to think about. It's a reminder that we aren't chosen to be chosen. We're chosen for a mission. We're chosen for... Chosen is just half of the sentence. We are a nation chosen to represent God in the world. We are a nation chosen to lead spiritual lives that will elevate ourselves and the world around us. And I give you all a blessing that each in our, wherever we're holding, each in our own way, whatever we incorporate today, whatever we incorporate tomorrow, whenever it is, we remember that there are no clergy. It's our Judaism. We own up to it, and we take it to the next level. Thank you very much. And if you want a great resource,
Kosher Jewel.
donate to Project. No, I'm just kidding. A great resource. This is the CRC app. The CRC is the Chicago Rabbinical Council.
I'm scared.
The CRC is the supervising body of the entire Midwest. They're the ones who go into factories. They're the ones who go into restaurants. And this app is absolutely incredible. If you are in a store and you see a strange symbol and you're like, is this good? Is this any good? Like, anyone can make up a kosher symbol, right? I can start my own kosher symbol and I decide what I think is kosher, what's not, and I slap my, is this any good? You scan the image with your phone and it tells you. They go around from city to city interviewing the different agencies, seeing how they work, and they have like a rating system and they tell you which ones you can trust, which ones not. You have any question about a product, want to figure out anything interesting, this is a great app to have. They do amazing work. They also, by the way, just if I'm mentioning them, they see it as their mission to provide kosher food to Chicago at a loss. They lose hundreds of thousands of dollars on kosher restaurants in Chicago because they are hiring staff to go through these restaurants and make sure they're kosher, and they don't want that charge to come from the restaurant that will dissuade the restaurant from having kosher food. So as a service to Chicago, they offset that cost. They lose hundreds of thousands of dollars because they are an incredible service. Shout out to them, and thank you all for being here. Yes.